Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Monster Party Podcast Blu-ray commentary for the Giant Gila Monster. Yes.
Gila Monster!
Gila Monster.
Right.
Not Gila Monster, as we've been taught our entire lives.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, you've been wrong.
Yes.
That's right.
It's Gila Monster.
I'm so ashamed.
Oh, get over it. I am Matt Weinhold.
I'm Shawn Sheridan.
I'm Larry Strothe.
And I'm James Gonis.
The Giant Gila Monster is a low-budget monster flick, obviously, from the 1950s that a lot of horror and sci-fi fans are probably familiar with. Like its companion film, The Killer Shrews, which was shot at the same time with the same production crew, Gila Monster has been in the public domain for years, so it was released dozens of times on VHS and especially DVD.
It's an odd little film that came out at the tail end of the 50s, just as the giant monster trend in movies was starting to come to an end. But Gila Monster has some interesting aspects about it that make it stand out from similar genre fare. The genesis of the film started with producer Gordon McClendon, who was a Texas businessman and millionaire, and a pioneer in radio broadcasting. As early as high school, he developed an interest in radio, and after attending Yale, he fought in World War II and worked for the Office of Naval Intelligence. Eventually, McClendon was reassigned, and he started broadcasting on political events for an armed forces radio station.
In the 1940s, McClendon founded the Liberty Radio Network, which broadcast recreations of baseball games. It was one of the largest radio networks in America with over 400 affiliate stations. Eventually, he did live baseball game commentaries, most famously for the October 3rd, 1951 finale of the National League playoffs between the New York Giants and the Brooklyn Dodgers. You guys know baseball, right?
Of course.
I'm not familiar.
Now, later, McClendon, along with his father, B.L. McClendon, founded radio station KLIF in Dallas, where he perfected the top 40 radio format. It was a huge success, and from that, McClendon built a radio empire. He was a true innovator and one of the first broadcasters to introduce all news radio stations, as well as easy listening or Muzak radio, the concept of a mobile news unit, traffic reports, commercial jingles. He's one of the first guys who did all this stuff.
It's funny, I thought all that stuff just happened.
I thought, yeah, that's the way you do it. McClendon also invested very successfully in drive-in movie theaters in Texas. And there were tons of drive-ins in Texas in the 1950s. This naturally led to McClendon going into movie radio promotion. He started promoting movies on his own KLIF station, and his creative style of broadcasting made the release of these films like main events.
Gordon said of his movie promos that it was the principle of painting a word picture in the listener's mind. No canvas is as large as the imagination. It was the same approach he used for his baseball game recreations from earlier. The promos got people talking all about his films.
Eventually, McClendon's promos caught the eye of major film studios, who hired him to promote their movies. So he was soon doing radio promos for major Hollywood motion pictures. McClendon wrote and voiced many of the promos himself, and some of these movies included The Guns of Navarone, Samson and Delilah, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, Barefoot in the Park, Where Eagles Dare. Not only that, but he did radio promos for films that didn't do as well upon their initial release. So films like Citizen Kane and From Here to Eternity, those are classic films, but at the time of their release, they didn't do that well. Mm-hmm. But when they were re-released, and McClendon did the radio promos for those films, those movies actually did better in their re-release runs.
The next natural step for McClendon was to move into actual movie production. Gordon formed the McClendon Radio Pictures Corporation with the theory that if we can sell pictures, we can make pictures.
McClendon purchased land near Denton, Texas, about 30 minutes from Dallas. He built a soundstage as well as cast and crew housing, which he named Cielo Studio.
So this way, he was able to produce and fully own his movies, all outside the typical Hollywood system. It was a working studio and convenient location land combined.
McClendon then teamed up with frequent John Ford actor Ken Curtis, who wanted to get into producing, and they set out to make movies.
Co-producer Ken Curtis started out as a singer. and early in his career sang in Tommy Dorsey's band. He later hosted a country music radio show in the 40s and soon joined the Sons of the Pioneers as a lead singer. The Pioneers were one of America's earliest Western singing groups and had many famous members, including Roy Rogers. They put out many records, appeared in numerous films and TV shows, and won many awards. The group has had several incarnations over the decades and have never stopped performing since they began in the 1930s. Among the awards they've won, the National Cowboy Hall of Fame, the Hollywood Walk of Fame, the Country Music Hall of Fame, the Grammy Awards, and in 1977 they were named a national treasure by the Smithsonian Institute.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Ken Curtis soon started acting and doing singing parts in movies and signed a contract with Columbia Pictures in the 40s. He also married Barbara Ford, who was director John Ford's daughter, and also an assistant editor on several of her father's films.
So, as John Ford's son-in-law, nice work if you can get it, Curtis started appearing in many of Ford's movies that starred John Wayne, with Curtis often playing the scruffy hillbilly type. These films included The Quiet Man in 1952, The Searchers in 1956, The Wings of Eagles in 1957, and The Alamo in 1960.
Later in his career, of course, Curtis became famous for playing Festus Hagen, the deputy, on TV's long-running Gunsmoke series. And he continued having a very prolific career in TV, mostly guest starring on lots of different television shows.
So Gordon McClendon and Ken Curtis, along with Gordon's father, B.L. McClendon, produced and shot 2 films back-to-back, The Killer Shrews and The Giant Gila Monster. Both films were shot in and around McClendon's Cielo studio from January to mid-March of 1959. 2 films shot in less than 3 months.
Nice.
I know. The films were shot specifically to play as a double feature.
And because there were so many drive-ins at the time in Texas, and with McClendon's background in popular radio, Gila Monster was purposely targeted at teen audiences, featuring teenage heroes, although a lot of the actors look way too old to be teens.
A little, eh?
Yeah.
But I mean, they had, the hot rod culture, drag racing, malt shops, rock and roll, radio DJs. They just put everything they could that would appeal to a teen audience.
Yeah.
Plus, these filmmakers were very savvy to the fact that horror films and monster flicks were very popular at the time with the kids, so that was the genre they went for. Very much like how Alfred Hitchcock, after seeing the popularity of American International Pictures films like I Was a Teenage Frankenstein, decided to do his own low-budget horror thriller, which turned out to be Psycho.
The director they chose to helm both movies was Ray Kellogg.
Dun dun dun!
Kellogg started out in Hollywood as a special effects technician, specializing in photographic effects, matte paintings, and miniatures. He did effects for over 100 movies, mostly for 20th Century Fox. However, most of these films were actually not horror or sci-fi related, but rather mainstream action or drama films, comedies, and several Marilyn Monroe pictures like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, The 7-Year Itch, and How to Marry a Millionaire. Kellogg did, however, do some uncredited effects work on The Day the Earth Stood Still, probably one of my favorite films of all time.
And Gila Monster star Don Sullivan was quoted as saying, Ray Kellogg was directing because he was a special effects man and had done a lot of special effects work and was very talented. So producer Ken Curtis made a deal with him. Do the special effects and I'll let you direct this movie. And Kellogg was very nice and easy to work with.
So, although Kellogg isn't officially credited with the special effects of the film, Ralph Hamaris and Wee Risser are named for the special photographic effects. It's most likely that Kellogg was in charge and oversaw all the Gila Monster effects in the movie.
In addition to directing Shrews and Gila Monster, Kellogg also worked on bigger budgeted Hollywood movies as a second unit director, including The Egyptian, South Pacific, the Batman feature film based on the 60s TV show, and Tora, Tora, Tora. He also worked on the pro-military film The Green Berets in 1968, co-directing the movie with John Wayne and Mervyn LeRoy.
Before his Hollywood career, Kellogg was a military cameraman during World War II, and one of his assignments during this time was to film and chronicle the Nuremberg war crime trials. Much of the famous film footage from that historic event was shot by Kellogg.
Also during his wartime career, Kellogg got to know director John Ford. Ford was making documentaries for the U.S. Navy and actually did some secret photographic missions for naval intelligence.
So, between producer Ken Curtis, who appeared in many John Ford and John Wayne films, and director Ray Kellogg, who also knew Ford and worked with Wayne, you had this little regional Texas-shot film that actually had some legitimate Hollywood crew working on it.
Now, the star of our film was Don Sullivan, who plays Chase Winstead. Sullivan was in the Marine Corps during the Korean War. In the mid-1950s, he moved to Los Angeles, and he was quoted to say, "With $3 in my pocket, a young guy out looking for a fortune." While in LA, he started dating actress Judy Meredith. Meredith should be familiar to classic horror sci-fi fans for her appearances in several well-remembered genre films, such as Jack the Giant Killer in 1962, William Castle's The Night Walker from 1964, and Curtis Harrington's Queen of Blood in 1966.
Now, Don was a tall, handsome guy, so Judy convinced him to look into an acting career. He joined Judy's acting class, and soon enough, he was getting acting parts in TV. Eventually, this led to roles in several low-budget horror films. And 1959 was a stellar year for Sullivan because he appeared in no less than 4 cult horror films. The Monster Piedras Blancas, Curse of the Undead for Universal, that was an uncredited bit part, Teenage Zombies by the infamous schlock director Jerry Warren, and, of course, The Giant Gila Monster.
I think this movie would have worked way better as a radio play.
Howdy, Eb.
Hello, Sheriff.
I don't have any word for you, Miss Humphreys.
Agatha Humphreys was played by the actress Stormy Meadows. This was Stormy's only film. Howard Ware, who plays Ed Humphreys, had a sporadic career as an actor. His other credits include several Larry Buchanan films. Yeah, including 1961's The Naked Witch, in which the taglines on the poster warn us that this is the strangest story ever told, and that it's an adult film. Then in 1964 came Underage with the tagline, "Was this relationship normal?" No, obviously. And also in 1964 was yet another Larry Buchanan epic, The Trial of Lee Harvey Oswald, speculating on how the trial would have gone if Oswald had not been killed by Jack Ruby. After Ware was done with Larry Buchanan, he was cast in 1973's sort of anti-blaxploitation film, Fox Style, about a man called the Black Fox who, according to the tagline, cleans the scene and makes his name in the money game. It is also advertised as a positive black film, so that's good.
Yeah.
And then the last film that I could find with Howard Ware is a 1973 satirical comedy about the fast food industry called The Pickle Goes in the Middle. Also appearing in the film is Susan Lanier from the 1977 version of The Hills Have Eyes. Bill McGee from Don't Look in the Basement. Sean, one of your favorite films?
Love that movie.
And he's also in the trial of Lee Harvey Oswald.
Wow.
Then there's Bill Thurman from a lot of Larry Buchanan movies.
Yep.
And some good ones as well. And Charlie Dell, who was Professor E.J. Parsifoot in Jason of Star Command.
I remember.
Yeah, but I digress.
Much action this afternoon?
Sheriff got a new patrol car. We'll get a tune-up job out of that.
Is that nitro safe?
We don't know too much about Cecil Hunt, who plays Mr. Compton, but why don't we learn a little bit about nitroglycerin?
Well, nitroglycerin, it's a dense, colorless, explosive liquid. And in the 1940s, hot rodders experimented with the fuel technology of mixing 20% nitro and 80% methanol mix. Now, it would make the engines go faster, but it also destroy the engines with its corrosive effects. And exposure, you would love this, because if you have exposure to high doses of nitroglycerin over time, it can cause severe headaches known as bang head or NG head. And you can develop a tolerance over time or a dependence after long-term exposure, which can really mess you up. And quitting cold turkey of inhaling this stuff, withdrawals can be fatal. So you don't want to hang out with nitroglycerin.
When production started on both Gila Monster and Killer Shrews, Producer McClendon admitted that his first excursion into movie making was a bit daunting. He wrote a sarcastic letter to a friend saying, quote, "I'm going very quietly crazy getting ready to shoot our 2 epic productions starting here in January. These are turning out to be horror pictures in every sense of the word, but we are looking for tremendous grosses in southern Tibet."
I wondered who was on that party line a while ago.
Fred Graham as Sheriff Jeff. Graham played semi-pro baseball while also working in the sound department at MGM. The studio was making a mystery crime film called Death on the Diamond, which involved baseball players being murdered. So Graham was hired to tutor the actors on how to throw and pitch, and even doubled for one of the actors in some catching scenes.
From there, Graham started a long career as both an actor and stuntman. He doubled for and did stunt work for many famous actors, including Clark Gable, Nelson Eddy, and also Basil Rathbone in The Adventures of Robin Hood in 1938.
Graham eventually went over to Republic Pictures and did lots of stunt work there for westerns and serials. He also got to know John Wayne and ended up being his stuntman in many productions. As an actor, Graham played lots of supporting roles, usually as cops, soldiers, truck drivers, and bad guys. His movie and television credits are in the hundreds. Some of the notable films that feature Graham include After the Thin Man, Shadow of the Thin Man, Sherlock Holmes and the Voice of Terror, War of the Worlds, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Rear Window, Vertigo, and several serials including Captain America, The Purple Monster Strikes, and The Crimson Ghost. He was also an uncredited stunt coordinator on The Killer Shrews.
The Giant Gila Monster script was written by J. Sims. Sims was a TV writer who had worked on a few popular shows at the time, including several westerns like Law of the Plainsman, The Rifleman, Have Gun Will Travel, and Gunsmoke. It's most likely that this western connection is what got him involved with Gila Monster through producer Ken Curtis.
In addition to writing The Killer Shrews and The Giant Gila Monster, which were his first feature film credits, Sims would end up running a lot for TV, especially cult shows like Thriller with Boris Karloff, Honey West with Anne Francis, The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and The Girl from U.N.C.L.E. He also wrote scripts for 3 other interesting horror sci-fi feature films: The Creation of the Humanoids in 1962, Panic in Year Zero, also from 62 with Ray Milland and Frankie Avalon, and The Resurrection of Zachary Wheeler from 71 with Bradford Dillman and Angie Dickinson.
And Panic in the Year Zero is another huge favorite of mine. I love that movie.
I do too. Looks like a little gem.
Yes. Desmond Doge is the hitchhiker, and like Howard Ware, Desmond's film career also began with the Giant Gila Monster. He was more successful than Howard Ware, but like Ware, Desmond typically played uncredited or bit parts like the Cotton Candy Man in Paper Moon, or Jimmy the Guard in Chuck Norris's 1982 classic, Silent Rage. Desmond was also in a lot of the same films that Howard Ware was in, Fox Style, The Trial of Lee Harvey Oswald, and The Pickle Goes in the Middle. And he worked sporadically in films for over 30 years and appeared in roughly 18 films and several TV series. His most notable might have been the character of Harvey in 4 episodes of the popular 80s TV series Dallas.
The cinematographer on The Giant Gila Monster was Wilford M. Klein, and this guy really worked his way up in the business, with over 118 cinematography credits to his name and 1 Oscar nomination. Klein started out shooting silent western films for director Edgar Lewis in the 1920s. From there, he worked for MGM, going on location all over the world to shoot short films for Travel Talks, voiced by James Fitzpatrick. These films showcased unique locations unfamiliar to Americans with titles like Colorful Guatemala, Honolulu, Paradise of the Pacific, Sacred City of the Mayan Indians, and Modern Tokyo in 1935. After years of doing shorts, he worked as a Technicolor associate on David O. Selznick's Gone with the Wind in 1939.
Klein worked for numerous camera and electrical departments, and by the late 40s and early 50s had moved up to cinematographer on big A-list films, such as The Story of Seabiscuit with Shirley Temple, Calamity Jane with Doris Day, The Last Wagon with Richard Widmark, and Monster Party favorite William Castle's The Tingler.
Yeah.
He did big films, low-budget films, and television. He was a working cinematographer's cinematographer. No film was too small, and he gave his expertise to every film he worked on. Sure, some scenes in Giant Gila Monster are just one shot, but that's what the budget called for. From the mid-60s to the mid-70s, Klein did mostly television. His one Oscar nomination was for Aloma of the South Seas from 1941 with Dorothy Lamour and John Hall.
You know, watching this movie has gotten me all worked up about Gordon McClendon. I need to know even more about him.
All right.
Well, in the 1960s, McClendon briefly entered politics. As a conservative Democrat, he ran for the U.S. Senate in 1964, losing against incumbent Ralph Yarborough. He also ran for Texas governor in 1968, but soon withdrew from the election and the Democratic Party because of irreconcilable differences with President Lyndon Johnson's Vietnam War policies.
The ominous narration at the beginning of the film was provided by producer Gordon McClendon.
McClendon died of cancer at his Texas ranch home on September 14th, 1986, and was inducted into the National Radio Hall of Fame in 1994.
You could say that as far as radio is concerned, he was in the top 40.
He would have liked that.
Oh, man. The character of Lisa was played by a woman conveniently named Lisa Simone.
What are the odds?
I know. She was really more of a dancer and model than an actress. Her real name was Lillian Chaika, and at an early age, she had taken dance lessons with Brigitte Bardot. At age 22, she took the pseudonym of Lisa Simone, and in 1957, she won the award for Miss Cinemonde for a French film magazine at the time. Now, this got her noticed, and later that same year, Miss Simone represented France in the 6th annual Miss Universe pageant in Long Beach, California.
In that 1957 Miss Universe pageant, Lisa Simone competed against 32 other contestants. She didn't end up winning, but she was considered one of the most beautiful women in the world. She ended up doing several films and TV series, mostly as uncredited bit parts where the producer just needed a pretty face, like, for instance, 1958's Missile to the Moon, where she played a moon girl.
In the mid-60s, she married American actor Steve Barclay. They eventually relocated to Italy, where Lisa became a dance teacher in Rome, and Barclay moved into producing and public relations. They had a daughter, Catherine, who was disabled, but Steve and Lisa stayed married all the way to his death in 1994. Before passing away at the age of 85 in 2020, it was said that Lisa Simone enjoyed talking about her brief time in Hollywood and took her career all in stride.
DJ Horatio Alger Steamroller Smith is played by the real-life DJ Ken Knox, who worked for several radio stations in Dallas, Texas. From the late 50s to the early 60s, Knox worked his magic from producer Gordon McLennan's station KLIF-AM, which was the top station at the time. Knox would move on to Dallas Easy listening stations, KTLC-FM, which would eventually become KMEZ.
Ken Knox didn't have an extremely long film career, but whatever career he did have, he owed to Giant Gila Monster executive producer Gordon McClendon. Why take the time auditioning seasoned actors when you can hire your own staff talent?
Exactly.
Knox got another shot at the big screen with 1960's My Dog Buddy, also produced by Gordon McClendon and Ken Curtis, who also appears in the film. And it's directed by Gila Monster's own Ray Kellogg. And in the film, Ken plays Dr. White.
That same year, Knox would branch out from Gordon McClendon Productions to be cast as Colonel Marty Martin in one of my favorite micro-budget science fiction films, Beyond the Time Barrier, starring the hideous sun demon's Robert Clark. Beyond the Time Barrier was directed by another Monster Party favorite, Edgar G. Ulmer, responsible for such classics as 1934's The Black Cat, the 1945 noir thriller Detour, 1951's The Man from Planet X, and 1957's The Daughter of Dr. Jekyll. Time Barrier was shot back-to-back in Dallas, Texas, with another one of Ulmer's films, The Amazing Transparent Man, yet another movie I enjoy. I even have the original one-sheet.
Oh.
Needless to say, Edgar G. Ulmer was a very fine director, but let's face it, he was no Ray Kellogg.
My baby, she rocks and rolls.
Although The Giant Gila Monster is not considered a classic of the genre, clips of and references to it have been featured in other films and TV shows. A sampling of those include From Dusk Till Dawn, the series opening night episode, Watchmen, American Grindhouse, Hookers in a Haunted House, Attack of the 50-Foot Monster Mania, Ernest Scared Stupid, The Rat Race, where it was a movie title shown on a theater marquee in Times Square, and also in a whole bunch of Mystery Science Theater 3000 episodes, as you would expect.
Right, yes.
Whenever I bring her things, a rock and roll and tippy-toe, I never know, and always glow and swing and sing.
Sullivan went on to say, Jay Sims, that's the writer, tried to throw in everything from the kitchen into this movie. He had songs, he had hot rods, he had monsters. He had a little of everything. It's the only one of the films I did that I really enjoy. The production manager of The Giant Gila Monster was Ben Chapman. Now, Chapman was primarily a production manager, but he also had a hand as an assistant director or second unit director. Contrary to popular belief, this is not the same Ben Chapman from the 1954 film The Creature from the Black Lagoon. Now, that was Tahitian-born 6'5" actor Ben Chapman, who played the creature on the land. Some of the confusion might lie around the fact that production manager Chapman worked on both Flipper, the 1963 feature, and following TV series with Riku Browning, who played the underwater creature in Creature from the Black Lagoon. Now, Browning wrote the story for the first Flipper feature, which eventually became a TV series. Production manager Chapman put so much into the Flipper TV series that he was eventually credited as the associate producer with Riku Browning on the 1964 feature film Flipper's New Adventure. As an accomplished production manager, assistant director, and second unit director, Chapman worked on a slew of feature films and TV series. In addition to Flipper, he was listed as an associate producer on Around the World Under the Sea, Hunters of the Reef, and the 1980 popular TV miniseries Shogun.
Now, Steamroller, have you noticed that he uses more teenage slang than the teenagers do?
Yeah, it's true. He's hip. He's with it.
Yes, he is, yeah.
The movie livened up a little bit when he came on.
I agree.
Yeah.
220s. How about that?
He is dreamy.
Now, the sheriff's car, that's a 1958 Ford Fairlane, four-door hardtop, sold between 1955 and 1970. The Fairlane got its name from the Dearborn, Michigan estate of Henry Ford. This was the second generation of Fairlanes. This car was longer, wider, and lower, and pretty cool tail fins. All Fairlanes would feature a trademark stainless steel Fairlane stripe on the side of the vehicle. Customers and cops really liked the roominess of the interior of the car and was considered the flagship of Ford's full-sized cars. The Fairlane helped push the introduction of the Crown Victoria, another full-size car enjoyed by police forces all across the nation. In fact, my former boss drove around in an old gold Crown Victoria, and he said that cops would always wave at him like he was some kind of an undercover cop. Back in 1958, its base price was around $1,960.
That's reasonable.
Right angles to the direction the car was traveling?
That's right, they did.
Headquarters think I'm nuts.
Now, believe it or not, The Giant Gila Monster was actually remade in 2012.
I don't believe it.
Yeah.
It's true. It was a direct-to-TV digital release just called Gila! Exclamation points.
Sexy.
This film was directed by Jim Wynorski, and Wynorski is known for his low-budget films. He was a Roger Corman alumni, and he's done tons of low-budget horror and sci-fi films, including Chopping Mall, Deathstalker 2, The Return of Swamp Thing, Ghoulies 4, Vampirella, and many others. Wow. And his remake of The Gila Monster actually sticks fairly close to the original film, using the same basic plot and characters with some minor changes and additions. And in his last film role, original Gila Monster star Don Sullivan appears as a cameo as a scientist and expert on Gila monsters.
Right. See you tomorrow.
Right.
One of the best things about this movie is the score. And it was composed by Jack Marshall. Now, Marshall was originally from Kansas. He was born in Kansas in 1921. And he made his career primarily as one of Capitol Records' top producers in the 50s and 60s. Mainly, he was a jazz, rock, and classical guitar guy. He released 2 albums with jazz drummer Shelly Manne. He arranged the Peggy Lee hit Fever.
Oh,
Nice.
A classic.
Yeah. And he did work as a film composer before this for a couple of films, Thunder Road and The Missouri Traveler, both in 1958. He's best known, practically a household name, as far as TV themes go, as the composer of the Munsters theme,
Classic.
which also earned him a Grammy nomination in 1965.
Nice.
just a nomination?
Yeah.
Well, and to piggyback on genre television, he did work with Dominique Frontiere for you Outer Limits fans.
That's right.
Yeah.
Most of his subsequent work was in television. He did music for the Henry Fonda series The Deputy, also The Investigators, Don't Call Me Charlie, and The Debbie Reynolds Show. As far as soundtrack releases, his output is sort of underrepresented. Mainly there are 2 CDs from the specialty label La La Land. One of them is a compilation, Thunder Road, the film music of Jack Marshall. The other one is the soundtrack to Munster Go Home from 1966. Marshall died young in 1973. He was only 51. And his son, Frank Marshall, made himself a name as a big Hollywood producer, working with Steven Spielberg on many, many Amblin projects, as well as a director in his own right on pictures such as Arachnophobia, Alive, Congo, and 8 Below.
He's also an Oscar nominee, a Grammy Award winner, and a Tony Award winner. And his wife, Kathleen Kennedy, is the president of Lucasfilm. So I think he's doing okay.
Yeah.
The theremin sounds you hear in the Giant Gila Monster were provided by innovative musician Paul Tanner. Tanner played the trombone in the Glenn Miller Orchestra from 1938 through 1942, recording their biggest hits including In the Mood and String of Pearls. After the group disbanded, Paul played in a U.S. Air Force band and later moved to Hollywood to become a studio musician. While attending the University of California, Tanner earned a bachelor's degree in 1958, graduating magna cum laude, a master's in 1961, and a doctorate in 1975.
Paul Tanner is known for developing the electrotheremin, a variation on the theremin instrument patented by Leon Theremin in 1928. Now, the theremin is an electronic musical device that is played without any physical contact. A player waves their hands between 2 metal antennae, controlling the frequency and volume of the eerie sound that the instrument creates. And actually, I own a theremin, and they're extremely fun to play with.
I've played your theremin.
Yeah, it's a very cool device.
Can you play a song?
Kind of, sort of. I really kind of need to practice more on it, but it's really fun to play with, and it just makes such a unique sound, unlike anything else. It's really cool. Tanner's electrotheremin differed from the standard theremin by being operated by a wire in the back and not the waving hands method.
As a professor at UCLA, Tanner met student Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, who would later use Tanner and his electrotheremin for the songs Good Vibrations, Wild Honey, and I Just Wasn't Made for These Times. You can also hear Tanner's electrotheremin box in the title theme music for the 60s CBS comedy series My Favorite Martian. Paul Tanner died in 2013, making him the 4th to last surviving member of the Glenn Miller Orchestra.
And if I could, I would like to present you guys with a very special Giant Gila Monster rock reference. How do you like this?
Nice.
So here we go.
Okay.
After Glenn Danzig, the frontman for the iconic punk band The Misfits, quit the group, he formed the band Sam Hain. The font for the Sam Hain logo is the same one used for the Giant Gila Monster logo.
Nice.
Yeah. Uh-huh. And Glenn Danzig would use the Giant Gila Monster font once again when he formed his next solo band, simply titled Danzig.
Wow.
Nice.
Boom.
Sullivan recalled another dangerous moment during shooting involving the scene with the crashed car. He said, "My buddy and I are in the ravine, hooking up the winch onto the crashed car. When we attempted to haul it up the slope, the car began to turn and shift, and I knew that this was very dangerous. At one point, the car shifted as if it was going to tip over. You can see a few camera cuts. They had to adjust the camera to prevent the car from tipping over."
And speaking of the McClendon family, Jenny is played by Jan McClendon, daughter of Gordon McClendon. This was their only part.
The talent in that family.
Amazing.
Impressive. Now, the giant Gila monster has been criticized by a lot of folks for having a real lizard as the monster instead of some sort of, model or
puppet or something.
Yeah,
Right.
right. Somebody in a suit.
Yeah.
But it was not the first or the last to use live creatures or animals to be a monster in a film, especially a genre film.
Yeah.
Well, The Lost World from 1960.
Sure.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, Irwin Allen.
Right.
Yeah. 1 million BC, the 1940 version, had a bunch of that. And I think that
Yes.
was that's one that you see the footage reused, I think, a lot.
Right.
Aside from the Irwin Allen movies, where it's like a alligator with a fin on it and then a lizard fighting each other. And it just makes you feel sorry for the lizards.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I think the thing about The Lost World is you can see that they're iguanas, but there is a time when it seems like the iguana just kind of hanging there. They put like a little wire or string to kind of lift him up.
Right,
And he's got
yeah.
his hands
Yeah.
dangling.
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
As a kid, I actually thought he was up on his hind legs going, but on second, third viewing, it's like,
Yeah.
he's being held up. So.
Yeah, he's manipulated.
Well, yeah, so I don't know if the lizard was that into it.
No, they're never into it. And that's the advantage of CGI, at least these days, is you don't have to torture a
an
poor
animal.
lizard. You
Right.
can do it for other reasons now.
Because you don't feel so bad when it's an insect, like in the beginning of the end
Oh, yeah.
From 1957,
with
that's
the
right.
grasshoppers.
But it didn't seem like any of those grasshoppers were being injured in any way. All they were doing is just running across a
Right.
photo of a building.
Right.
Well, some of them at the end, though, you see some of them kind of going in the water and they're drowning, and it
That's
looks like
so-
poor grasshoppers in the water.
That's true. That's true.
But I would say also spiders were very common too as giant monsters in the 50s. Of course, you had Universal's tarantula,
Yeah.
which is done pretty effectively, actually.
Yeah.
And Earth versus the Spider, Burt I. Gordon's kind of lower budget spider
Version.
movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you had those.
In 1959, in Journey to the Center of the Earth, you have the big iguanas that have the big sailback on.
Right.
And I will say
Right.
this, as much as, they're gluing a fin on, they look really cool. At least I thought so. They looked as close to real dinosaurs at the time. I
Just hope it wasn't any sort of precursor to super glue or anything like that.
Yeah, really.
You stuck it on with something that they could get off easily, but I doubt it.
You know, the practice carried on even into the 70s. There were a whole bunch. Food of the Gods, H.G. Wells.
Oh, yeah.
Empire of the Ants.
Yeah.
Damnation Alley.
Oh, those scorpions.
And maybe the most egregious example of this using real animals as monsters was from 1973's The Neptune Factor,
Oh, man.
which was kind of a fairly polished looking production with some big stars.
Yeah.
But the monsters,
The fish.
yeah, it was a deep sea submarine encountering all these giant fish deep in the ocean.
From a
and
fish tank.
They were just literally seeing watching a
literally.
fish tank. Yeah.
Literally a fish tank.
I mean, it was one of those films. I was waiting for the big sea monster. I'm like, what? Because I had a fish tank at the time, and it was like I was watching my own fish.
Right. Yeah. Don't
pretty
go
much.
see the Neptune Factor. Just put your face close up to the tank.
In fact, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I would say the giant Gila monster is much better
I
than
agree.
the
I
I would
Neptune
say
Factor.
so.
Yep.
I'd say get the poster for Neptune Factor because it's a really cool poster.
Yeah.
That shows like an actual monster fit. No, that's not. That's not in the film.
no. It's a terrible looking
Yeah.
real fish.
Mom Winstead was played by Gay McClendon, Gordon's wife.
Oh, I wonder
Now-
how she got the part.
This was her only film. She was the daughter of former Louisiana Governor James A. Noe, who served as interim governor for 3 months in 1936 following the sudden death of Governor Oscar Allen while in office. Gay McClendon passed away in her home state of Louisiana in 1993 at the age of 70.
It's amazing. It's like He's the squeaky clean good kid, and he takes care of his crippled sister. The guy does it all, you know?
I don't trust him.
This is an amazingly melodramatic scene that seems kind of out of place in a horror drive-in film, but I don't know. It kind of pulled it off.
If I had not gone to the drive-in with a date, this is the point where I would have asked for my money back. This scene is like, I will never get that time back.
Well, look, you're imagining that you're going to a drive-in with your date, and this is like gonna put
My
you
date in quotes.
It's gonna put her
Your
out of the
supposed
mood, out of
date.
the mood, you know. But when I saw this as a kid on television, I thought this was charming.
Well, I appreciate the scene, but the first time I saw this film, it felt like a scene from a completely different movie.
Yes,
and
yes,
everything
yeah.
stopped.
Right.
And like, what's going on here?
Well, I thought it was setting you up. It was setting you up because, see, this is really nice, and something bad's gonna happen.
I think, remember too, though, this was both the Killer Shrews and this film were the first movies made by these guys. And I think it was a situation where, what are the big moments, the big kind of things and elements you put in movies that are successful, you know? So of course they put all the teenager stuff and a giant monster and hot rods and rock and roll. And we have to have the heartfelt stuff too.
Chase's instrument here is a ukulele banjo, and it's the smallest banjo of its kind. It's also called the banjo uke or the uke-jo. The first banjolele was made around 1910 and became very popular in the 1920s. It's a small 4-string banjo with a fretted ukulele-style neck. Many musical instrument companies made these types of banjos, like the Oscar Schmidt Company and S.S. Stewart, which made all kinds of stringed instruments and had ads in the Sears and Roebuck catalog back in the day. The sound is described as having a very old-time string or Appalachian sound. Kids in the late 1950s would find their parents' old banjolele in the attic and messed around with them. It had a renewed interest in the 1970s with folk song musicians and rock stars like Brian May from Queen and George Harrison from The Beatles would use ukulele banjos on stage during concerts. And back in the 1990s, famed strings player Jeff Claus from the alternative rock folk group Tompkins Country Horseflies would mainly use banjo ukuleles for their songs like Veins of Coal or Cluck Old Hen.
The editor of Giant Gila Monster, Aaron Stell, was a very busy working editor, and he edited over 135 productions for either feature films or television. Early in his career, he worked at Columbia Pictures from 1943 through 1954, editing primarily westerns like Cowboy in the Clouds, Swing in the Saddle, and Return of the Durango Kid. In the 1950s, he edited a bunch of TV series, including Adventures of Rin Tin Tin, The Count of Monte Cristo, and The New Adventures of Charlie Chan. Now, his feature films are genre ones, and you might like some, you might not. But so we got Creature with the Atom Brain from 1955, and in 1957, the infamous Beginning of the End, the Burt I. Gordon movie with the giant grasshoppers.
Yeah,
That's right.
Yeah. Now, his big break came in 1958 on A Touch of Evil. You might have heard of it.
Yeah.
Written and directed by Orson Welles. Aaron Stell was one of 3 editors, and as the story goes, it was Charlton Heston, the star of Touch of Evil, who suggested to Universal to hire Orson Welles. Welles wrote the screenplay, he directed it, he acted in it, and during post-production, Universal was not really that happy with the cut Welles had done, so they forced him off the project.
Yep, they did.
And so what happens when this sort of thing occurs is that the film is recut with a different editor. Now, it's hard to tell who that editor was definitely. He's credited on the film.
Yes, he is.
But there were 2 other editors, Virgil Vogel and Edward Curtis. So, it's hard to say what exactly they did in the movie or if any of it still exists. So, yeah, that's the story.
Now, Stell would go from working on an A-list film noir film directed by Orson Welles to the Giant Gila Monster for Ken Curtis. But then, he also went on to he did The Killer Shrews and My Dog Buddy. After freelancing for a number of years, he found himself at Universal from 61 to 62, then the Pacula Mulligan Productions from 1962 to 65. And it was there where he got to work on To Kill a Mockingbird in 1962. Such a great film directed by Robert Mulligan, starring Gregory Peck from the classic book by Harper Lee.
Right, yeah. I've heard of it.
Other genre stuff that he did was 1972's Silent Running, directed by Doug Trumbull.
Excellent film. Underrated.
Yeah. In the 1970s, he edited for many television series such as The Most Deadly Game, The Amazing Spider-Man, Space Academy, The Paper Chase, and made for TV movies like One of My Wives is Missing.
It's one of my favorites.
Yeah. Rage, and Guyana Tragedy, The Story of Jim Jones.
Wow.
So the lesson here is, if you want to work in this town, sometimes you need to do a schlocky film like The Giant Gila Monster every once in a while before you get A Touch of Evil or To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Work. That's the important thing. If we're going to talk about The Giant Gila Monster, I think we also have to talk about its companion film, The Killer Shrews, also from 1959.
For sure.
Because they have a lot of similarities. They were shot at the same time and at the same location as Gila Monster and made for roughly the same amount of money. It was done for like about $125,000. It was also produced by Gordon McClendon, also directed by Ray Kellogg, and written by Jay Sims, and made with most of the same production crew from that film. The plot of The Killer Shrews involves a group of people stuck on an isolated island that's besieged by giant mutant shrews, which were created by using both puppets and actual dogs covered with crude shrew masks and pelts of matted fur. But, you know, the final result is just remarkable.
It really
is. It's like they suddenly they're no longer dogs.
No.
Where'd the dogs go?
No, they're Killer Shrews.
Yeah. Killer Shrews features a lot of adult characters. There's lots of fighting, there's arguing, sexual tension. It almost plays like a Tennessee Williams play, but with giant shrews. Very unlike Gila Monster. The Killer Shrews stars James Best, who is, I would say, best known for playing Roscoe P. Coltrane in the TV series The Dukes of Hazzard. You also have Ingrid Good, and she, like Lisa Simone, was a beauty contest winner. She was Miss Sweden in 1956 and also a runner-up for Miss Universe. Ken Curtis, who was the producer of Gila Monster, plays the trigger-happy main antagonist to James Best in The Killer Shrews. And then, of course, you have to have Gordon McClendon as an ill-fated, nerdy scientist who is killed by the shrews.
Yeah.
Well, you steamboats and dreamboats,
That
that
steamroller's
sturdy
Smith.
on another section
Keep
of
a
the
mold.
old steamroller here.
The film does have a kind of a Peyton-Place quality to it, you know?
Yeah.
Just the kind of...
Except without any controversy. What if everybody at Peyton Place got along
perfectly
and
fine.
nothing ever happened?
Right.
Roller coming out.
That's where Chase has been all day, getting steamrolled.
This'll be a blast.
Both films premiered as a double feature at the Majestic Theater in Dallas and the Palace Theater in Fort Worth on June 25th, 1959. The day before the premiere, the films were advertised in the Daily Morning News as, quote, horror masterpieces.
They need to see more movies. Take that, Exorcist.
Well, remember, this was the day before the premiere.
Right.
I don't know how they were advertised after. An example of McClendon's radio ad copy for The Killer Shrews goes like this. This is station WKKK, and we urge you to report to your local authorities at once any sighting of a giant killer shrew.
I wonder how many calls they got.
And that kind of goes without saying, right?
I think since then, WKKK might have changed their call letters.
Oh, Shug. The movie should have just been about you and your travels.
He could have had his own franchise.
Yeah. Yeah, like the Ernest of
Sure.
the 50s.
Or his own brand of vodka with his little face on it, you know?
Sure. It probably wouldn't be vodka, though. It'd be like sour mash.
Yeah.
This is my favorite song in the movie. Seriously.
Was this an upside-down windshield wiper?
Sure, yeah.
Well,
It looks like they took it away.
Yeah. It's not there. Or it's not, maybe not taken away, it's just an older car.
Right.
Bell, let go.
Now this is great, because in this train scene, the train engine changes like about 3 times. 3 different train engines.
Right. One of the standout characters in the Giant Gila Monster, for sure, is Old Man Harris, as played by George Clinton Fisher Jr., but he's usually credited by the more popular stage name Shug Fisher. And Shug, short for Sugar, said he got his nickname from his mother because he was such a sweet baby.
Aww.
Born in 1907, Shug played the mandolin, guitar, and fiddle, and he would later weave comedy into his musical act. One of his gags was using a fake stutter, which he was apparently very good at. He inevitably headed out to California, and after working some not-so-glamorous jobs, ended up getting on the radio. Unfortunately, he was paid only with publicity, leading him to say, "Publicity is fine, but you can't eat it." My motto was, "Pay me something or I don't play."
Like us.
Right, yeah. Shug would soon get work playing with country groups like the Hollywood Hillbillies and a band actually called the Beverly Hill Billies. He even got an early song credit in the 1943 comedy Swing Your Partner, where he composed and sang the Shug Shug Yodel.
Come on, you know the words, everybody.
I do.
Shug's career really started to pick up when he began working in a series of Roy Rogers films and singing with the legendary group the Sons of the Pioneers.
Shug made a name for himself on the radio with Sons of the Pioneers and wrote many songs including Out on the Open Range and Riding Down to Santa Fe. During his time in the group, Shug worked with singer Ken Curtis, and the two would become lifelong friends. The Sons of the Pioneers recorded songs for several John Ford classics, including Wagon Master in 1949 and Rio Grande in 1950, and performed the theme song for The Searchers in 1956. After a break from the Pioneers, Shug would rejoin them in 1951 for a celebrated performance at Carnegie Hall, the first Western band to play there. And the group would eventually get a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
I'm a Model A. Bought it at 32 for...
Through his career, Shug played various colorful characters in a long list of movies and TV. He rejoined his old pal Ken Curtis as a regular on the 60s show Ripcord and played Shorty Kellums in numerous episodes of the TV version of The Beverly Hillbillies. See, it was foretold. Now, not surprisingly, he did a lot of Western TV series like Bonanza, Have Gun Will Travel, Daniel Boone, The Virginian, Laredo, and one of our favorites, The Wild Wild West.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. He guest starred in a slew of other popular television shows, including Petticoat Junction, Love American Style, The Dukes of Hazzard, Starsky and Hutch, and numerous episodes of The Magical World of Disney.
Some of Shug's notable feature film credits include Mr. Roberts, Sergeant Rutledge, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, The Reavers, and the film classic The Apple Dumpling Gang Rides Again.
It's a classic. It's a classic.
And for you horror and sci-fi enthusiasts, Shug can be seen in such genre TV favorites as Lucan and Kolchak the Night Stalker.
Yeah.
And don't forget Cyborg 2087 with Michael Rennie.
Oh, and if you love cartoons like we do, you'll love Shug in the 1955 Tom and Jerry animated short Pecos Pest, where he not only does the voice of Uncle Pecos, but also provides guitar for the song Froggy Went in a Courtin'. Sadly, after suffering from a persistent illness, Shug Fisher died in March of 1984 with his longtime friend Ken Curtis by his side.
Aww.
My baby, she rocks and rolls.
So guys, when we do these type of audio commentaries, I always like to look at the press book, the original press book that gives distributors ideas of how to market the film, promote it.
Sure.
So let's look at the Giant Gila Monsters.
Yeah.
And let's start with the taglines. I love the taglines. For example, only hell could breed such an enormous beast. Only God could destroy it. I think nitroglycerin had a role somewhere in there.
It was God's nitroglycerin.
Holy nitroglycerin. I like it. Now, in the other media section of the press book, we're told about the TV trailers, and there's some nice copy. It says, startling excerpts from the most gripping moments of the picture. Gripping. Available in 1 minute, 20-second, 2 of these, and 8-second lengths. Designed for local identification. Also available in 1 minute combination crossplug with the Killer Shrews.
I think the 8-second length was probably the most appropriate.
Then there's the radio spots. It says 3 powerful emotion-wrought 55-second announcements and 5 20-second spots bang home the full emotional intensity and terrifying violence of the giant Gila monster, stabbed with climactic moments from the actual soundtrack. Again, voiced and produced by Gordon McClendon.
Of course.
We know him so well now. And then if you want to use the theatrical trailers, we're told compelling, provocative, full production trailers keynoting the picture's most violent, forceful moments, available for one or both productions. Emphasis on stars in each picture adds romantic interest for all ages.
Wow.
So, Granny might like Don Sullivan and having some private thoughts of her own. So in these press packets, sometimes they offer you a template for what you would write for your local newspaper to advertise the film. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to have the Monster Party players read this wonderful sample copy.
Yeah.
Shawn, take it away.
All right, here we go. A mammoth ravaging reptile, 3 times the size of an ordinary office building, thunders into blank today. That would be the town that is opening.
Right.
When the giant Gila monster opens at the blank theater, whatever theater it's opening at. The enormous freak of nature throttles a sleeping, defenseless community when it looms from out of the wasteland to gorge itself on food it must have to satisfy limitless cravings. Earlier rumblings about such a weird and fantastically proportioned monster have been circulated through the area after 2 teenagers suddenly disappear, leaving only the remains of a crumpled hot rod coupe in evidence.
Go, Larry.
Mysteriously, several others are reported missing. An oil truck is suddenly snatched from the highway, and a streamliner is tumbled from a trestle. Yet no one survives to confirm the existence of such a beast. Vague and divergent hearsay becomes absolute reality when the giant Gila monster barges through the matchbox walls of a country barn where a teenage record hop is being held. Gunfire only incenses the ravaging reptile, which, by now, threatens to shred a complete community with the sweep of its giant claw.
Can I just say something? In the copy, they're referring to the matchbox walls of the country barn. They're making fun of their own production values.
Well, I think it's like the beast crashes through as if it's a matchbox.
But when it is, though.
It's literally a matchbox.
I know, it's true.
All right, James.
Young daring and ingenuity are the only tools left to thwart the monster's path of vengeance and destruction. A moment when even the world might be uprooted in the wake of the seemingly invincible beast from the wilderness.
The world. And once again, nitroglycerin.
Even the world.
Hey guys, now that we're all here, why don't you give me some random facts about the giant Gila monster?
Well, the film was made for just under $140,000.
Great.
The Gila monster was actually played by a Mexican beaded lizard and not a Gila monster.
What?
Yeah, that's right. The Mexican beaded lizard is one of 2 venomous beaded lizards that lives in Mexico and southern Guatemala. The beaded lizard is larger than the Gila monster and is black with yellowish bands. It eats mostly small insects, birds, rodents, smaller lizards, or birds' eggs. An adult beaded lizard can grow between 22 to 36 inches, whereas the Gila monster only grows to about 22 inches. The beaded lizard is even heavier than the Gila monster. These lizards are not harmful to man. They prefer to stay away from any human development. They are venomous, but their venom isn't really powerful enough to kill a person. Sadly, due to the illegal exotic animal trade, myths, and superstitions, these lizards are endangered, but they're now protected under Mexican and Guatemalan law.
Mr. Wheeler was played by Bob Thompson. And apart from McClendon's My Dog Buddy from 1960, he didn't do any other film acting. He did do some work in theater, though. And in 1969, he was awarded the Joseph Jefferson Award for Best Supporting Actor in a Play for his performance in Sabrina Fair at the Mill Run Theater in Chicago, Illinois.
The reviews of The Giant Gila Monster were mixed at best. A snippet of what Variety said, "Story is mild, but as an audience reaction feature, Gila Monster has appeal for the science fiction situations. Slick black and white photography, mostly outdoors, captures some fine North Texas scenery to make this a worthwhile feature.
What?
Trick camera work has the Gila Monster giant-sized, feeding its way through wooded areas, wrecking a train, breaking into a dance hall to panic a teenage record hop."
The Variety reviewer went on to say, Don Sullivan is adequate as the male lead. He uses his appearance to exploit 3 of his own compositions, a dubious interpolation. His vocal assets don't match even his minor acting talents. Add that Lisa Simone, a beauty contest winner, is a dull leading lady.
Well,
Ken Knox, a local DJ, gets off a slick stint before posing as a KILT jock. That's the McClendon station in Houston, hence the plug at the Teenage Hop.
So he liked everything but the movie. Like,
Yeah.
the trees were nice.
And he concludes, acting honors goes to veteran Fred Graham, who plays the diligent sheriff. This was written apparently by someone named Bark.
One thing worth mentioning about this film is that a lot of the reviews say that the monster is rear projected, and it's not. There's no rear projection in the film. Even Michael Weldon's Psychotronic Encyclopedia film says it's a rear projected lizard, but that's not the case. Another review from TV Guide said that too. They said, a rear projected monster just doesn't put audiences in a deep state of fear, especially when it's a lizard. It does, however, induce occasional uncontrolled laughter. Sullivan and his merry band of hip teenagers battle the giant Gila that has been threatening northern Texas and even disturbing a local record hop.
Disturbing.
It definitely disturbs it.
well, he does. Yeah.
And Alan Jones from the Radio Times awarded the film 1 out of 5 stars, calling it unintentionally amusing rather than scary. The cinematography is quite good.
It really is.
It's sharp. It's not always inventive, but it's more than competent.
And it creates the mood. It really does. That's one thing about this film. Does have a very unique feel and look to it, and you're kind of immersed in this weird little world.
Well, you don't have much choice.
Yeah.
Now, this is a party. This is a dance, I tell you.
This is a dance, yeah. I didn't realize that the town had that many kids.
I like that Old Man Harris is getting some action here.
Yeah. Hi, kids.
Hi.
Who's 18?
Hi, kids.
We got a little pickup group together.
Regarding the songs in the film, Sullivan had done some singing, and he actually brought along his banjo ukulele when auditioning for the part for producer Ken Curtis. When Sullivan got the role in Gila Monster, Curtis told him he wanted some songs to use in the movie as well. Says Sullivan, so of course, as sophisticated as I am, I said, sure, you can have the songs. I was just happy to get the movie. So Sullivan provided 3 songs for the film, and for no additional money beyond his SAG minimum salary.
Sullivan ended up performing 3 songs in Gila Monster. Laugh Children Laugh, also known as the Mushroom Song, I Ain't Made That Way, and My Baby She Rocks.
And if you're looking for some hard rock songs for a Bible study class, these are it.
According to the film's press book, producer Gordon McClendon intended to record tie-ins with Gila Monster by releasing and airing Sullivan's songs from the film. After all, this was a rock and roll monster movie. And these songs actually were recorded and released. One of them, I Ain't Made That Way, sung by Don Sullivan and backed up by the Sneaky Pete's, was the A-side of a single from Roscoe Records, and the B-side was called The Gila Monster Crawl, by the Sneaky Pete's, and that was just an instrumental.
The instrumental music in this film is great.
I agree.
Yeah, I also agree.
Yeah, it's too bad there's not a soundtrack. The other record that was hyped was called Gila Monster, and it was recorded as a single by Joe Johnson and released by Cascade Records. Now, not much is known about Joe Johnson, except that he and his band were employed by Jack Ruby in Dallas. And Johnson was interviewed by the Warren Commission because of that after the Kennedy assassination.
That is unbelievable.
Wow, that's interesting.
Wow. It's a very obscure single. It is available to listen to on YouTube, and I recommend the experience because you got Joe Johnson.
Not the song.
Well, maybe not the song. It's all of a minute and a half. It's like a minute and 40. Okay. But Johnson is playing this sort of soulful rocker, and he's playing against a child. It might be a child or an adult imitating a child, but it's sort of this back and forth, and it's trip.
Wow. Is the child laughing? Because they're supposed to laugh. Children laugh.
The child did not laugh.
I see.
The 1950s were a thriving time for films aimed at teenagers, and they were everywhere. Sure, you had the more respectable troubled teen dramas like Rebel Without a Cause, Blackboard Jungle, and Peyton Place.
Then you had films that leaned a bit more to the exploitation side, like High School Confidential, Hot Rod Girl, Teenage Doll, The Violent Years, Robert Altman's The Delinquents, Cool and the Crazy, and Drag Strip Riot.
And of course, for all the monster kids like us,
yes,
there were lots of teen horror films. For instance, I Was a Teenage Werewolf, I Was a Teenage Frankenstein, Invasion of the Saucermen, Teenage Zombies featuring Don Sullivan, How to Make a Monster, Frankenstein's Daughter, and Blood of Dracula.
But when it came to teenage films with rock and roll, it was a golden age. We're talking Carnival Rock, Don't Knock the Rock, Don't Knock the Twist, Go Johnny Go, Hey Boy, Hey Girl, Jamboree, Jukebox Rhythm, Let's Rock, Mr. Rock and Roll, Rock All Night, Rock Around the Clock, Rock Baby Rocket, Rock, 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 Shake, Rattle, and Rock, and Twist Around the Clock.
Wow.
Just to name a few.
Wow.
That's a lot of rock.
That is.
That's a lot of rock, my friends. Now, what sets Giant Gila Monster apart from many of these rock and roll movies is its wholesome nature. Chase is probably one of the nicest, most conscientious teenagers in film history.
He is the perfect teenager.
Yeah.
Maybe he's such a perfect teenager because he was 28.
He had time to really get it right. But yeah, he's amazing. He takes care of his widowed mother and crippled sister. He's getting an engineering degree. He actually sits on a drunk DJ to get him to fall asleep. And although he's an aspiring rock star, one of his songs is a children's gospel tune.
Aww.
A far cry from Vic Morrow or Russ Tamblyn.
For sure.
I also love how the Giant Gila Monster is just carefully avoiding messing up any of the cars.
Right.
Just walking in between, because he likes a nice classic hot rod as well.
Speaking of the Blob, this reminds me a little bit about that big climactic scene where it comes through the projection screen in the movie theater.
Yeah.
If they really wanted to make this movie wholesome, Chase should have played music for the Gila Monster and calmed it down.
Tame it, yeah.
Storage shed. I've got an idea that might work.
You've been after this, now you've got it. You're deputized. Listen,
Now, why didn't he give him a whistle?
True.
Okay, here's your badge.
Here's a
your
badge.
whistle.
This means nothing. You have no authority.
Whoa.
All right, everybody.
Teenage Rebellion. That's the closest thing you're going to get to a Teenage Rebellion in this movie. Now, regarding the hot rods in the film, Don Sullivan was quoted as saying, "When we're doing the scene where I'm driving down the road and the wind is whipping my face, they had mounted on the front of the hot rod a rack, the camera, the cameraman, and the director. They were all at the front of the hot rod, and I couldn't see anything in front of me. So the only visibility I had was glancing to the left at the edge of the road. I'm in that hot rod doing 75 miles per hour down the highway, no visibility, just glancing out the side. It was very, very dangerous. There could have been a major accident there and killed 3 or 4 people, but nobody seemed very concerned." Hot rods were typically American cars that were older, bought cheaply, then rebuilt or modified with large engines designed for speed and a coolness factor. Many hot rods in the 1950s were purchased from junkyards where there were tons of old Model T Fords, Model A's, or Model B's. Millions of those cars were made between 1910 and the 1930s. So there was an abundance of them that could be sold cheaply to teenagers or many coming back from World War II. Many of those former soldiers received technical expertise in the military and used that knowledge to modify the engines and make their own hot rods. After World War II, hot rod clubs started to pop up all over the country, and drag races on lonely vacant streets were organized, causing problems for the local authorities. Sometimes many abandoned military airports were often overtaken by hot rod clubs to make their own sports safer. Eventually, the National Hot Rod Association was formed in 1951 to take drag racing off the streets and into controlled environments.
And the press packet offers yet even more hot rod info. They say, the roaring hot rods that burn up the track roads in the Giant Gila Monster are not from Hollywood prop departments. Instead, the leading Texas dragsters were paid by the producers to lend authenticity to the film. Some models were let out more than 125 miles per hour during the film's shooting. One, valued at more than $15,000 by its owner, broke 2 axles during 2 car chase scenes. That's a lot of money for a car back then.
Back then, yeah.
And you got to wonder how much of that is true and just
that's
pure hype.
Yeah.
I'm a little confused. Did it break one axle during the first chase and the other axle during the second chase? How did that work?
You know what? When you're making a movie, you don't have time. You got to look, I know you broke an axle. Let's go.
Yeah. Another fact about the hot rods, according to Don Sullivan, quote, "These were national champion hot rods. McClendon got them from someplace, I don't know where, but they were so fast. The scenes where I had to start up and drive out of the driveway, it was very difficult because if you pushed down on the gas pedal, the wheels would spin out of control and throw gravel and stuff all over. They were so fast."
Don Sullivan said, "We're shooting the scene where I drive the hot rod with the nitroglycerin in it. I leap out, and it runs into the Gila Monster and blows it up. Well, we're doing it, and Ken Curtis says, 'Don, do you think you can dive out of the car? Put it in neutral, and then dive out of the car, and the car will slow down on its own. You're not going that fast anyway.' Well, you know me. I go, 'Sure, I can do anything. Absolutely no problem.' Well, I had no idea that at 10 miles an hour when you hit the ground, how hard it is. Oh God, I laid there for about 5 minutes. I thought I'd broken about half the bones in my body. I told Ken, if you want to retake that scene, you get a stuntman because I'm crippled. Actors shouldn't do their own stunt work, and we didn't have any pads or anything." Sullivan was also involved in some of the incidental and background music in the film. Ken Curtis and I got talking early on in the production of the Giant Gila Monster, and he said that Gila Monster was to be my tour de force, with the music and me being the lead. Curtis told me that I might as well suggest some of the background music for some scenes. I suggested a style of music to jazz up the hot rod scenes and the climax. So I suggested the wild drums and the single guitar chord that leads in the crazy sax solo when everything is climaxing at the end of the Giant Gila Monster.
After appearing in Gila Monster, acting jobs started drying up for Sullivan. So he left Hollywood, and since he had a chemistry degree from his college days at the University of Idaho, he went into the hair care industry. He ended up working at companies like Redken and Vidal Sassoon, and even started up his own private hair product companies. Now, even though he had retired from acting, in 2008, Sullivan did make a well-received appearance at the Monster Bash convention in Pennsylvania.
And when it comes to his experience on the film, Sullivan was quoted as saying, "The number one thing is, it is a movie that anybody can watch with their children. There's no profanity, no sex, no drinking. It's a clean movie that's number one for children." Well,
apparently,
drinking aspect.
Doug Fisher didn't get the note.
Right. But I know what he means, though. It's a pretty innocent movie that you can show little kids, I think.
And that's it for the Gila Monster. We hope you enjoyed the Monster Party audio commentary for the Giant Gila Monster. I'm Matt Weinhold.
I'm Shawn Sheridan.
I'm Larry Strothe.
And I'm James Gonis.
And remember, laugh, children, laugh.
It's what the mushroom would have wanted.